Who won that trade?
Everybody wins, right?
Oh, no. I need a definitive answer. Who won the trade?
I think the definitive winner is we win because the saga is over. We can put our takes to bed on the Ben Simmons trade saga. For that, I'm very grateful. What a beautiful day it has turned out to be. But I think the Sixers are better. I think the Nets are better. I think this is one of the Harden got what he wanted. Ben Simmons is probably going to get what he wanted in the sense that he's going to play for a very different but still very good team. I really like this for everybody, to be honest with you. How are you feeling about it?
I still can't decide who won the trade yet because there's so much variance on each side, right? Because I saw James Harden about a week and a half ago in San Francisco, and like you could tell he didn't give a fuck. He didn't care about anything. He didn't care about playing. He didn't care about what the team was doing. There's always been, I'm sure you're in NBA circles and you've heard this rumbling about James Harden wanting to go to Philly for a long time or be traded and being gone. It wasn't that much of a secret this season, right? And then I saw the body language. I see all these things happening. You know, he's doing a thing where he gives up on a team and is I don't want to do the weight thing, but he just seems a little out of shape, and then he just kind of sabotages his way out of a city. So I'm curious, but the first thing that comes to mind is, does he just get right back in shape and turn into an MVP candidate with Joel Embiid? I don't know. That's my biggest question with this. And we both know this. Joel Embiid has been playing like an MVP. He's been playing on a mission. And he's not going to take no shit from anyone, including James Harden. If James Harden isn't in gear, there's going to be problems this season. So I'm just curious about the fit about James Harden. Let's start with Philly. Does this instantly make them even more of a title contender? Does this eclipse them over the Bucks? What do you see on the Philly side of the trade?
I think it gets them into the mix in a way that they just weren't before. They just didn't really have either the firepower or the defensive reliability to be one of the elite teams in the East as they were built before. Now they at least have one of those things. You know, this is weirdly a team that needed to improve defensively. They needed to get better in terms of their rebounding going into the deadline. They didn't really do either of those things. They just got James Harden, which is, you know, you're slamming a square peg into a round hole in some ways, but he's just flat out one of the most talented scorers in the league, one of the most talented players in the league, and it's going to work on those merits alone. Now, is the fit going to be perfect all the time? Is the supporting cast going to be perfect all the time? Obviously not. But there's enough there between balancing Embiid and Harden, between finding, you know, guys like Matisse Thybulle, for example, who can defend in ways that James can't. You know, there's just enough kind of give and take between this roster and this new superstar on it for it to make a good amount of sense, at least enough sense to get them into the mix in a way that I think they would really have been long pressed to do before.
In a perfect world, if this works out in the perfect way, I think the best case scenario for this is a way better version of the 2014 Houston Rockets, where you have a guy like James Harden who can play in the pick and roll. He's a one-man offense, but he has the big man that can actually really offset his game. And you see, and you remember back in 2014 when Dwight Howard, he was just a pick and roll guy. He wanted to be the postman. He wanted to be all these things. He wanted to be Shaq sometimes. The other times he wanted to be a great version of Dwight Howard. I can talk myself into this if all things go right, because Embiid is a dominant big man in the traditional sense and in the futuristic sense. He can shoot the three. He can also play the post game. I love Joel Embiid's game, but it's almost like the Kobe Shaq in reverse. I think that's the worst case scenario.
What's the reverse, do you think?
Well, what was the biggest thing when Kobe and Shaq played with each other? Kobe was the hard worker, the hard-nosed guy, not going to take any shit. I'm going to play, whereas Shaq was the vibes guy. But when it was time to turn it on, he turned it on. It's kind of in reverse now. The guard now is the vibes guy that'll play his way into shape, and you have this center who has had injuries and had all these things, and he wants to win now. And he's already had a guy, whatever you would want to say in Ben Simmons, who wasn't there for him to start this season. However you want to call it, wasn't there for him. And so then you have this guy, James Harden, who has pushed his way out of both scenarios. I don't know. I think it could go really, really good. It could also go really, really bad. And I can talk myself into either scenario.
First of all, before we even get into that, do you think bigs or guards are more conditioned to be vibes guys than the other? Where do the vibes come from on a prototypical NBA team, do you think?
I think the vibes typically come from the guard.
Yeah.
I would say typically from the guard, just because they're seen more. They're kids like guards more than they like bigs. They tend to have a bit more personality. Only big that consistently is just like all vibes, but is also good on the court, I think would be Shaq and would be Joel Embiid, ironically enough.
Yeah.
But I do think that do you think this is this? I don't know. I don't know what's going to win out. What do you think would win out? Because James Harden is a great basketball player, a generational basketball player.
Yeah, inarguably.
But I don't know. These last few years just put a bad taste in my mouth about James Harden. It's really just hard. It's hard to see ever since 2019.
I think it's totally understandable to feel that way. To see the way he's carried himself in these two exits with the Nets, with the Rockets, I think it's totally natural to come away with that kind of impression. What's going to be interesting about Philly is the dynamic you just zeroed in on. Joel Embiid is not only the centerpiece of that team, he's the vocal leader of that team, he's the mouthpiece of that team, he's everything for that team.
Yeah.
Harden when he went into Brooklyn, he had to lead vocally because KD isn't always that guy. Kyrie was coming and going. He became a vocal presence, at least last season, in a way that he may not have even expected. I think he can roll in here now and just kind of be a little more chill, a little more laid back, a little more fall into place in some ways. I think we get very caught up in the, is this superstar A's team or superstars B's team? I think that can be a little reductive at times. But in terms of structure, in terms of form, this still feels like a Joel Embiid team to me, featuring now one of the great isolation scorers we've ever seen, one of the great shooters that we've had in recent NBA history. That kind of thing has to work on some level. Will it work on a championship level? That's where we get into the fine tuning over these next couple months.
The question is, can James Harden be a number 2 for an extended stretch, right? Because there's arguably on the depth chart in Brooklyn, he was a number 3 guy. I mean, I think talent-wise, he's number 2, but in the hierarchy, it was Kevin. Then the world rolled around Kyrie, and then, James could play. I do think so. I think so. I mean, I think that talent-wise, it was and is KD, James, and Kyrie. Yeah. But I think from, the universes that I think the biggest orbit there is Kevin, and we'll get to him in a second. And the second biggest was Kyrie in there, just from the vaccine stuff. Totally. There was always something with Kyrie, to the point where it probably pushed James out. And you kind of forget how, and by consequence, you forget how good James is. But at the same token, James is unequivocally the number 2 guy in Philly. He just is. It doesn't matter about talent. It doesn't matter about who can shift a game. That's Joel Embiid's town. And that's kind of what happens when, you have a guy that's, the only time I think there's anybody that's kind of took over a city like that, I guess, was LeBron in Miami, but that was still Dwayne Wade's town. That was still Wade County. How is James going to adjust with being, he's not going to be the center of attention. If it goes bad and he's out of shape, or how those Philly fans are. I don't know how he's going to react if this goes bad. I don't know what this is. Probably this is his last shot at a title. It is. I wonder how he's going to deal with that and deal with that while being a number 2, because it didn't work out in Brooklyn.
It's a great question, and this is kind of the hidden personal tax of this more mercenary mindset, right? Of I'm just kind of go where the contention is, where I can win, where the rings are, where my friends are, where the other stars are. This is the cost of that. And we've seen it. I mean, Kevin Durant, case in point, when he was on the Warriors, I don't think he fully expected what it was going to mean personally in terms of reputation, in terms of just the dynamics of being in this area, to be on Steph's team, and kind of what that would shift onto him. How Harden will deal with that with Embiid is going to be fascinating. As you mentioned, a city with a history of animosity that will not hesitate to let you know when you're not giving your effort, when you're not defending, when you're not performing the way they want you to, even if it's not really your fault. Like they've been booing Tobias Harris for, as far as I can tell, being Tobias Harris.
Yeah.
I guess that's a criminal offense in Philadelphia for some reason, but it's going to take a lot. He's going to have to be patient with. He's going to have to earn their trust. He's going to have to work his way into not just the mix of that team, but the mix of kind of the culture of the franchise and the community in a different way than in Brooklyn, where he could just roll in to, again, a franchise that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving had taken over in some ways, but hadn't fully established.
That is huge, but they don't care about the Brooklyn Nets. Anybody you ask locally, they don't care. Philly cares. If he shows up, has the meme, if he's meme Harden and has the little beer belly, he's not gonna endear himself into that franchise. No. He has to work hard. He has to dive for loose balls. He has to care. And I think the biggest thing that you see, at least, because the body language of James Harden hasn't been great over the years, right? Like, I'm not going to say that he doesn't care about basketball, because I absolutely believe he does. He wouldn't be the MVP candidate year in, year out if he didn't care about the game. But there have been times, when his demeanor has just been kind of sulky. When he doesn't care, he throws the ball at people's ankles. He, especially when he doesn't like a vibe. If that happens in Philly, it's not going to end well. It's not going to be good.
Well, especially, James Harden is not a guy who historically has adapted his game all that much. He came into a situation in Oklahoma City where he became more of a sixth man, but since then, he has been the guy with the ball in his hands. No matter who plays with him, no matter where he is, even in Brooklyn when those three guys were all healthy, honestly, it was Kyrie who was flexing and adapting and becoming more of an off-ball player. James was running the second unit. He was still basically playing point guard for that team. He was still doing a lot in terms of what he usually does. Is he really willing to change this much, to play off of not just a good big, as you were saying, like, he's played with Dwight, he's played with Clint Capella, he's played with good bigs before, but not anyone who posts up this much and like this and who demands that much attention. Is he willing to be the guy on the weak side who's going to catch and shoot? Historically, the answer to that question is very much no. He's just not that guy.
If I'm Philly, I'm still scarred by that Jimmy Butler exit, and I think to go into that, you think about stars that have come to Philly and it not work out. He has an extension coming up. James does. And I think if whatever the extension is, the last year of that deal, if he finds the full max, all I think will be $60 million at 38 years old, right?
Not bad. Not bad.
I mean, shout out to James for getting to the bag, but do you give him that? Do you give him that extension? Do you just figure it out? Do you just say, "Oh, I'm going to do it," and I want to keep it James Harden? How does Daryl Morey navigate this thing? Is it a long-term marriage? Is it that when we've seen time and time again, if James isn't happy, he's going to sabotage the rest of the team. That's just what it is. We've seen that time and time again. If James Harden gets what he wants, and by consequence, he will sulk. He will have performances like he did in Sacramento. We've seen this time and time again. How do the Sixers protect themselves from that happening?
Well, so they have a little bit of a runway here, because it was reported today that Harden is opting in to his player option for next season. That's $47.3 million. Again, great job, James Harden. That gives you a playoff run together to really look at this thing and say, is this going to work or not? Is this something we need to invest in, as you're saying, with that extension, with that longer term commitment? And I think that's a good amount of time, because we've seen how much things can change for these franchises and for these stars in one playoff run. The Ben Simmons thing, it was uncomfortable. It wasn't always perfect. It flared up in one playoff run. Everything changed. All of a sudden, he's sitting out. He's totally gone, totally out of the picture. Even a worst case scenario for Harden and the Sixers, I wouldn't anticipate something like that. But a best case scenario, you get to the East Finals, you get to the finals, it makes it very easy to sign on that dotted line when extension time comes around.
Yeah, man, I'm curious to see about that Embiid-Harden relationship, because Embiid's going to tell you exactly how he feels.
Totally.
And if anything we've heard from Harden, it's very, it's vibes. It's a little passive aggressive. You get the Instagram cap. You don't really know what's going through his head, and that's going to be interesting if it goes bad. I would like to see. We've seen how Harden plays alongside alpha players. We saw that with Chris Paul, and it didn't really work out. We saw it. I think that's the biggest example of Chris Paul not working out. Well, I'm curious to see how that relationship will go.